Hi, I'm Gary Morell. I'm history professor at Grays Harbor College. I'm here with Pat Smith, political scientist and author, and she has a new book coming out, Revolution Revisited, Behind the Scenes in East Germany, 1989. So when I was reading your book, and as we were talking earlier, I just realized something that you wrote in there, and you said, most people think that Ronald Reagan and the Pope won the Cold War and freed East Germany. Doesn't seem that that is really what happened.
There's the understory. It hasn't been told very much, that it seemed like in the midst of all the things going on, then there was very little focus upon the people the activists who actually started marching around, these very small groups of people who organized and they built bigger and bigger groups, and pretty soon it was just massive demonstrations throughout the country.
And mainly, your book focuses on Leipzig and several different groups that were part of this revolution, and it built from small things. The prayer nights. Could maybe talk about the prayer nights.
Right. The peace prayers in East Germany had been around for quite a long time, since the early 80s, and in Leipzig they had met regularly on a Monday night where people would, there was a fairly large peace movement in East Germany, and at the time they were protesting the stationing of missiles in Germany, both by the West and the East, and so there were a lot of peace march activists, and a lot of that happened within the church. Now, and so there were peace prayers that were well attended at sometimes, 5 o'clock on Monday evenings. They happened in Leipzig. And sometimes they were very small, just a few people. Other times, when there was a big movement, something going on, they were much broader attended. But these activists strategized to use those peace prayers to build a broader following for some of the democratic changes that they wanted in East Germany.
Right, and all the church. Did I get the idea that the churches were one of the freest organizations in East Germany?
Right. The church was really the only organization outside of state-related organizations that was allowed to organize, and they were there was a fairly large church population. The country had about 17 million people, but there were about 5 million Protestants and 1 million Catholics in this country. So I think we often think of communist countries being totally atheistic, but there was a large group of church members, and sometimes a lot of these people were very committed church members. Others of them used the church because that was the only place you could really meet, unless you wanted to follow the state's program. And so
right, and some of the churches were more open and welcoming to these revolutionaries, is really what they were,
right,
than others were.
Right. That differed dramatically. It differed by different places within East Germany, and it differed within the same jurisdiction. Some churches were willing to let the groups work, and in Leipzig itself, part of the reason why the demonstrators, why they ended up demonstrating, was because when they got too political, they were pushed out of the church. They were no longer able to bring their program in the church. And there was this complicated relationship between the Stasi, the East German security police, and which kept pressure on the churches to kind of keep on a certain narrow line. And when the activists started pushing these political issues, particularly human rights issues, were particularly controversial, then then the state would put pressure on the church to clamp down on them or to not let them be involved anymore.
Right, and which human rights issues? I've read the book, but maybe you want to talk some more about the human rights issues.
Yeah, they started the first Leipzig, this group of 3 human rights groups, and human rights groups were fairly late forming in East Germany, in the pretty much near the late 80s is when they formed. But these 3 groups in Leipzig decided they wanted to try to protest some certain things. And they wanted freedom of assembly, they wanted more free speech, free press, and they started out with a demonstration in January where it
1989.
Right, January 1989. So this is the year leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and much of this started in Leipzig. There'd been a political opposition in Berlin before, but many of them had been arrested and sent out of the country. And so kind of the center of opposition shifted to Leipzig. And these groups planned a demonstration in January for freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. It was a parallel demonstration to the state-sponsored Rosa Luxemburg demonstration. And the group said that, if you really want free speech, you have to have free speech for those who think differently rather than just following the state line. And so they started there, and they strategized to be arrested. And then their hope was to build a broader following of people who believed in their things. And once they were arrested and mistreated, they thought they would be able to get more people.
And they were certainly right.
They were certainly right.
Yeah.
And so every month they planned a kind of demonstration of some sort that would be.
And it seemed that some church leaders, the higher ups, didn't care much for some of the ministers who were taking part and providing the space and for these people to meet and for the demonstrations to take place.
Right. There were a couple of them who were really were targeted, pressured a lot to keep their program under control and to not be so oppositional. Christoph Wonneberger, who was actually the inspiration for the peace prayers years earlier, he was one of them who sheltered oppositional groups, and he felt that that other groups, most groups can meet any place, but it was particularly important to provide a place where those that were more critical could meet, and so he sheltered them, and the bishop and the main churches put pressure on him to shut his program down.
Yeah. Your book is really, the story is exciting, and it's a wonderful story, and you tell it very well. And it moves in such a way that I found myself keep turning pages to find out about people, and as you came toward the end, the demonstrations doubled and doubled in size and doubled in size again. And would I be giving something away if I mentioned I think he was a minister who had the stroke?
Right. This was that
very
Wonneberger.
important.
Right. He was
Right.
very important. He was the one who provided much of the shelter for the groups, the inspiration for them. He was a human rights group member himself. He'd been a conscientious objector, where a lot of the people came from conscientious objector communities, where they were put in prison if they didn't serve in the military. A lot of people, and so the networks. He was part of that network. He had a lot of connections, and he had the stroke just as things were climaxing, and was no longer able to be part of the thing.
Yeah, was it the day before or something?
Yeah, it was like the week before the fall of the Berlin Wall, right?
Before
It
the
was
fall,
just,
after all that work and
right.
effort.
Yeah.
There was another track working at the same time in this, and that was people who wanted exit visas, people who wanted to
Right.
leave the country.
Right, and one of the most significant things about Leipzig, I think, was the fact that the groups that were oppositional, that wanted change within the country, they decided to join forces with these who wanted to leave. And there was a large group of people who wanted to leave East Germany, and that had happened for years. There'd been people wanting to leave the country for economic reasons, for political reasons, and they were very tight about giving exit visas. And so people would sometimes flee across the Berlin Wall. They would go to other countries like Hungary or Czechoslovakia and try to cross over to the West. And so most groups didn't, they wouldn't join with these groups because they felt they reflected badly on their own groups that wanted changes within the country. They didn't want the country to end. They just wanted a more democratic East Germany, most of the groups. And these people, if they were involved, you couldn't count them. They would just leave. And so almost none of the groups joined with them. But two of the human rights groups in Leipzig decided that they would join with these groups. And then they had a much bigger following of opposition when they got together and had demonstrations. There were only maybe 500 oppositional people in Leipzig at the most. to start with, and probably only about 25 or 30 who were really really committed in organizing and stuff. And so to have thousands of people from these people who wanted to immigrate join with them really made a dramatic difference in terms
Well,
of
and
the
toward the
movement
end, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Toward the end, when there were 400,000 or 500,000 people marching in Leipzig from the beginning, or to have that from that very small beginning, and in less than a year,
Right.
was really remarkable.
Right, it's just a dramatic story to
It
know
is.
that happened there, and that what I find so hard is the fact that these activists are seldom given credit for what happened. I mean, that's almost been forgotten about, but they were, if it hadn't been for them organizing those first 6 months and getting all the things together, it would have never happened.
Yeah, and it also sounded as if there was as if some people were frustrated a little bit once the wall fell and the revolution was successful. The people who wanted a changed East Germany didn't get their East Germany. They got subsumed by West Germany.
Right, and a lot of people in the political opposition would not have been wanting reunification. They really wanted more freedoms within their country. Particularly, a lot of people there felt that East Germany was a more egalitarian country, and they thought that social justice they wanted that for people, and that to be subsumed by the West, they weren't necessarily pro-capitalist, and that wouldn't be everyone, but a lot of the opposition would have been in that we really want to reform our own country. But what happened was so many of the political parties in the West were well organized, and they came in and kind of just took over the organization. And I think things happened so quickly that many people who were in the opposition, they never had time to really think about what program might we have or how do we organize this. They were just still in the midst of, let's organize this demonstration for this week. And the other thing I think was particularly important about what they did was that they kept the demonstrations nonviolent. And
Yeah.
from the very beginning, that was one of their plans, and were successful in that the whole way. And I think that's just kind of phenomenal that they could have 500,000 people marching when the troops, the Stasi were out. They brought in soldiers from other countries, they brought in tanks, they had all these things, and they still managed to be nonviolent throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, it sounded like Hungary in the 1950s or Czechoslovakia in 1968. And Honecker sounded like he was ready to use the tanks and the machine guns and the soldiers. But it seemed the Stasi guy in Leipzig, why did he do what he did? He didn't use them. He said, let's leave them alone.
Yeah, some of the things that I've been reading about to try to get a better understanding of some of that. Some people speculate that, well, part of it was that when they actually shooting your own people, when you bring the troops out and you're shooting your own people, your neighbors, your cousins, whatever, it changes that for a lot of people. And I think in part they weren't sure they could count on everyone who came through, the soldiers or some of the police to actually shoot them. I think they had a lot more people who actually came out to demonstrating than they ever anticipated, and they didn't know that they can control the demonstration.
Yeah, it does get to be a big problem when you ask a soldier to shoot his neighbor, and when it's always a good idea to bring them in from someplace else. How many people did you interview for your book?
I interviewed about 60 different people who are in the opposition or related to people in the opposition, or maybe some of the pastors related to that. And then I went back for multiple interviews with many of those people.
And you're still in contact with them and talking to them about where they are presently and what they're doing. And
I have been with quite a few people in Leipzig. I kind of featured like 10 or 12 people in Leipzig in this book, and I'm in contact with more than half of those, I guess, still pretty regularly. So.
And you also had, I like your backstory as well. You first went to East Germany in the 1960s when you were an undergraduate at the University of Kansas or Kansas State?
University of Kansas,
University
right.
of Kansas.
Yeah. Yeah, that was right. It was kind of interesting how things kind of came full circle and with that. But we had a chance. I was studying with University of Kansas had a summer language program, and we were studying in West Germany. But at the time, the German government provided money for us to go to East Berlin, and so we took a bus to the students from Kansas took the bus to East Berlin across East Germany through the transit corridor into Berlin, and then we actually. I and my roommates, we spent a day or so in East Berlin at the time, which we kind of didn't think much about it at the time. I mean, it was clearly different. We had to cross through the Checkpoint Charlie and things.
Right. And it hadn't been there that long.
No, it had only been there about 3 years,
right.
the Berlin Wall. So it was an interesting time, kind of fascinating to kind of set the context for some of this.
And then, it was 20 years or 25 years before you went back again?
Right, 1986, I went back again the next time. So I'd been to Germany, Western Germany, but I'd not been to Berlin or East Germany since then.
Did you speak German when you went back?
I worked with some tapes. I didn't major in German. I changed to political science after I went back for that, but I had worked with some tapes before I went. I went with a singing group to Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union in 1986, and I knew that German was a language of a lot of people in the region there, and so I worked on with tapes and to try to get somewhat not fluent, but get my German up a little bit, and it was really good because I was able to talk with people as we met in churches and other areas. And
well, this is a wonderful book, and it certainly deserves to be read, and it tells a story that we just have not heard before, and so I wish you really good luck with it. Again, it's Revolution Revisited, Behind the Scenes in Germany in 1989, available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the usual outlets.
It's supposed to be widely distributed, yeah.